What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the MulletCast, the podcast where business and pleasure collide. My name's Evan Balmer.
Good morning. It's Mike Marcia.
What's happening, Mike?
What's going on?
How are you?
Good.
Good. Today we are joined by Henry Vaccaro Sr. Henry is the owner of Vaccaro Construction. Probably the one person we need to speak to about redevelopment in Asbury Park because he was really there at the beginning before it was fashionable. Among other things, Henry also owned Kramer guitars, has lots of stories about music, and became a friend of Johnny Cash. He's also the author of Johnny Cash is a Friend of Mine. Check that book out, available on Amazon. Good morning, Henry. How are you?
Good morning. Great.
So, Henry, you grew up in Asbury Park.
I did. I was born on 509 4th Avenue. My dad was a doctor,
right,
and he had his office on the first floor, and we lived on the second floor.
Wow, that's great. So was he kind of the town doctor, would you say?
Well, it's a long story. My dad was a maverick as far as doctors go today. He had office hours 7 days a week, even on Sunday. He had morning hours, afternoon hours, and evening hours.
Right.
Made house calls every night. My mom was his nurse, and he took care of all the poor black people in town that nobody wanted.
Wow.
In fact, my dad was knighted by the Pope, knighted by Pope John the 23rd. They sent a courier over from Rome, and he did a ceremony at the Berkeley Carteret Hotel in 1959.
Wow.
And show you what kind of man he was. Since the dinner was at 7 o'clock in the evening, that allowed him to have afternoon office hours and see some patients first. So then he went home and put on a tuxedo, attended the dinner where they knighted my dad. They put this beautiful memorial around his neck.
Right.
And after the dinner, in his tuxedo, he made 3 house calls.
Wow.
And the last patient he saw said, "Here comes Jesus Christ in a tuxedo." And my dad died the next day, 51 years old, of a massive heart attack.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's my memories.
Wow.
And you were in college at the time, right?
I just started my sophomore year at Villanova, and the night of the dinner, after the dinner, I got in my car and drove back to school, and then I got the word Tuesday morning that he died, and came home, quit college, started a construction company.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. What was it like growing up in Asbury Park in the house of a doctor, and what was Asbury like at that time?
Oh, Asbury was the best. We lived there until 1946, and then my dad bought a home in Interlaken, and we moved to Interlaken. I still attended Holy Spirit Grammar School. I have a brother and 2 sisters, and I'm the oldest. And it was just an incredible time in our life to grow up in that environment. I mean, this is after the war, and Asbury Park was still booming, and we would walk from Interlaken all the way down on Saturdays down to the boardwalk, walk down the boardwalk over to the Mayfair or St. James Theater, and walk back home.
Right. That's a cool
Yeah.
time.
In fact, my first rock concert when I was 15 years old, I saw Bill Haley and the Comets in a casino building in Asbury Park, the start of rock and roll.
Oh, wow.
And I was there as a little kid.
That's amazing. And then Asbury went on to obviously have a very rich musical history.
Oh, it did.
Right. Between the Paramount, the casino, Stone Pony, obviously.
I mean, when you look at all the major acts that came to Asbury Park, it's pretty incredible.
It really is. So do you have a lot of memories of music every summer, of all the acts?
Oh,
coming
yeah,
through?
absolutely. In fact, I remember, I remember crazy things. I mean, remember going to wrestling matches in the casino, in the convention hall, and seeing Haystacks Calhoun, all 600 pounds of him, walking down the boardwalk with a chain around his neck and a horseshoe hanging from it.
Wow.
And seeing Bruno Sammartino and Antonino Rocca. Right. An incredible time. And then probably in later years saw the Beach Boys in the convention hall, and they're all there.
Right.
And my family also owned the Surf Garage, which became Hullabaloo and the Sunshine Inn.
Wow.
So
I have a lot of stories of my father going to Hullabaloo. That was his place. I think probably Springsteen's early band, the Castiles, got their start there.
Yeah, there's a rich history in Asbury Park.
That's for sure. Mm-hmm. So obviously it was a tough return from college. I mean, was there pressure on you now to kind of support the family in some ways as the oldest?
Yes and no. I mean, thank God my dad was a genius in real estate. Besides being a doctor, when he passed away, he was the largest taxpayer in Asbury Park.
Wow.
At the time, we owned a Santander on Deal Lake Drive, another apartment house called Lake Drive Court, the Miramar, several parking lots, a lot of houses on the west side, and there was income coming in. And my mom insisted that I go back to college. So she convinced me to go to Monmouth College, which is now Monmouth University.
Right.
Well, I didn't last too long because I had dreams of grandeur.
Right.
I wanted to be a contractor. And prior to my dad's death, we owned the lot which sat behind the Empress Motel.
Right.
And at that time, the Empress lot was owned by the city, and they were putting it up for sale. And my dad was going to bid on it with a local builder named Harry Strano, who was our neighbor in Interlaken, and they were going to build a motel there. Well, that summer, which is now 58, I went out and bought a used backhoe for $350. Before a backhoe was a machine of its own. This was nothing but an old farm tractor that had a little bucket on the front that would raise the hay to the second floor,
Right.
and a contraption on the back that was bolted on called a backhoe.
Right.
Well, the damn thing didn't work. And I towed it home to Interlaken and put it in a garage, and I'm kind of mechanically inclined. I got it running.
Wow.
And it was still a dog. So my father was proud of what I did. And one day while going out to Freehold, he passed a place that was selling brand new backhoes.
Right.
And he went out and bought me a brand new case backhoe and
Wow.
traded that machine in, and I now was a proud owner of a backhoe, which I was going to use when we were going to build the motel, which now is called the Empress.
Wow. That's
But
cool.
then my dad died, and I'm left with this backhoe.
Right.
And just picture this, a kid that yearns to do construction work is in a classroom in college
Right.
where he doesn't want to be.
It's a bad mix. Yeah.
So I got my first job basically in Asbury Park. We had a family friend, Paul Greco, that owned a company called Monmouth Oil Burner and Fuel Company. And I got the job to install his 550-gallon fuel tanks. He paid me the paltry sum of $50. Right. And I had to dig the tank, take the dirt away. But, man, at the end of the day, I got a check.
Right.
So I'm in construction.
Nice.
So that was basically my first start with digging ditches for him.
Right.
And then I learned how to put septic tanks in and sewer lines, and I did all that good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you get the real estate bug from watching your father as a property owner and developer? Was that where your interest
I
came from?
kind of did. You
Yeah.
could say that because, like I mentioned, my dad was a genius. He didn't make his money as a doctor, but
Right.
he would only charge $3.
Wow.
And if you got a shot, it was $4. So he really made his money in real estate.
Right.
And he at one time owned a home in Deal that used to belong to Mayor Haig of Jersey City. Mm-hmm. And the home took up the entire city block. Wow. And he bought the home and had an auction come in. They auctioned all the furniture off, and then he had a company come in, tear the house down, and he subdivided the property and sold it off. That was my first inkling into kind of getting a feel for a little bit of development.
Right.
And then my grandfather, there was a racketeer in Deal named Willie Moretti. And in real life, Willie Moretti, as portrayed in the movie The Godfather, gave the band leader of Frank Sinatra's an offer he couldn't refuse.
Right.
And we all know what that offer was. Well, Willie had this home in Deal, and my grandfather was his caretaker. And I started working there as a kid, cutting Willie Moretti's lawn. Well, the estate took in this entire city block. I forget the street it's on, but it's off of the main street in Deal, and it goes all I think it's Poplar Avenue.
Right.
And my grandfather had built little ponds in the back and tennis courts and all that stuff. And I remember going there, and Willie Moretti patted me on the head and brought me inside and gave me some milk and cookies. And a year later, he gets blown away in Hoboken.
Wow.
So, I kind of loved to work with my hands, and it was really my grandfather who worked with his hands.
Gotcha.
So I kind of got the bug there.
Right. So then once you got your backhoe going and started piecing together jobs, how did your company grow?
Okay. Probably I started, I guess, one of the earlier jobs I took was for a company called Ginola. Gene Ginola had a contract to build the 3rd Avenue Pavilion in Asbury Park. The city owned the old bathing pavilion there, and I got the contract to demolish it.
Right.
And how did I demolish it back then? I had this backhoe, borrowed Paul Greco's truck that had a winch on it, and we'd go up on the second floor, pull this cable out, wrap it around the window, and start pulling it down. Then we'd get it on the first floor, and I munched it up and loaded it on a rack body truck and took it away.
Wow.
So after I finished the demolition, I find that this company, Ginola, has a contract to build a building. And boy, I want to get involved.
Right.
So I got the contract from Genola to do the excavation for this site.
Right.
Well, I'm not saying Gene Genola was a con man, but he took advantage of me and my youthful inexperience and the fact that I wanted to do work in my hometown of Asbury Park and establish my name. I went to his office. He had an office on Webb Street in Asbury Park, which was, he had just built the Esplanade apartment houses, and there was a parking lot, and it went all the way out to Webb Street where his office was. And I remember vividly walking in there and telling him how bad I wanted to do this job, and man, he was ready to accommodate me.
Right.
I'll never forget this. He had a big set of blueprints, and I didn't even know how to read blueprints. But I had a friend of mine, his name was Bill DeLissa. His real name was Cornelio DeLissa, and he owned a landfill where Seaview Square Mall is.
Right.
Old Bill was as street smart as they come. I don't even know if he could read or write. I mean, but he was street smart. He was a garbage contractor, very self-made man. And after my dad died, he really kind of put his arm around me and took a liking to me and allowed me to keep my equipment out of his dump. And he then helped me estimate the cost to do this work. I said, Bill, I mean, if you dig, how many yards do you think you can dig a day? And he said, well, maybe we can dig 300 or 400. And I put prices to it. And anyway, now I sit down and I bring Mr. DeLissa with me. And Genola says, oh, he can't come in the room. So he made Bill sit outside, and I'm in the room negotiating this contract.
Right.
Genola pulls out these blueprints, and he says, how much is your bid? And I told him, oh, that's way too high. We don't have it. He says, you know, to help you out, see these footings over here? He put a circle around them. We'll take care of them. You don't have to dig them. Oh, wow, good. I took some money off. See that over there? Circle around. You don't have to do that either.
Right.
My contract says Henry Vaccaro does all the excavation and backfill. Sign the contract, get on the job, start digging. Wow, I finished this job and I made a profit. Superintendent says, well, we're going to start these footings tomorrow. I said, I don't have to dig them.
Right.
He said, what do you mean? I said, here's my contract. He said, your contract says all excavation and back. Yeah, but Mr. Genola said I didn't have to. Here's the circle around us.
Right.
He said, you're digging it, buddy, or you're not going to pay.
Wow.
So I ended up getting screwed.
Right.
I dug the thing. Now I get in a battle with Gene Genola's brother named Ted.
Mm-hmm.
He shows up on the job, and I'm down in the hole digging, and this little bastard is up there cussing at me. I just grabbed him and threw him in the hole. And they threw me off of the job and didn't want to pay me. I got paid, though.
Right.
Because my uncle was on the city council, and he controlled the check that went to Genola, so I got paid.
Gotcha.
That was my first experience into big-time general construction.
Right. So then, based on that experience, you're like, you know what? I need to do that again.
Yeah, but okay, then I got burned again. I now want to do this job for Lucarelli out of Newark. They built the Carlton House, which I think is now called Deal Lake Court. I'm not sure. It's like a 14-story building on Deal Lake Drive.
Right.
And we own the apartment house on the corner next door. And it's, the same thing there. In my naivety, I signed a contract that said that Henry Vaccaro does all excavation, backfilling, and dewatering.
Right.
Well, dewatering to me is if water gets in a hole, you pump it out. So I had all these pumps, and I'm not worried.
Right.
Well, since the building was alongside the lake, the water came in. So I had to dig these deep footings for the elevator pit, and they went like 6 or 7 feet below the level of the lake. So,
Right.
Well, next thing I know, I've got to rent what's called a well point system, which is you surround this excavation with pipe, and from the pipe there are points that go into the ground every 12 inches like a well.
Right.
And you put them in below the level of water, so they suck the water out and they make the excavation that it encompasses dry. Well, the only trouble was, since this was a union job, I had to man the well point system 24 hours a day.
Right.
And got beat up pretty bad.
Right.
So you live and learn.
Right. So you piece all this experience together and...
So now I want to become a contractor.
Right.
I want to become the guy up top that gets the check first.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. My next job of any significance was on the Howard Johnson Pavilion. I did the excavation and the concrete foundations now for a company called Britain.
Right.
Good guy, and I eventually got paid, so there was really no problem. But I wanted to be the boss, and Britain had this old estimator by the name of Dylan Hemstreet, and he got dissatisfied with Britain and he quit.
Right.
And man at the time was, I want to say, in his 80s. He took off for Tennessee for a vacation and came back, and we started talking, and I hired him. And his experience included building of the Tennessee Valley dams
Wow.
Just prior to World War II, out in Tennessee, where they flooded all the area where they made the nuclear stuff. I guess it's whatever it's called. And he then came to New Jersey, and he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers and was in charge of installing the 16-inch naval guns at Fort Hancock that guarded the harbor.
Mm-hmm.
He liked the area so much he stayed here, went to work for Britain, and then I hired him, and he became my estimator. Right. And the first job we bid on was the Sunset Avenue Pavilion. It's a long story how I got the job, but I eventually got the job and became a contractor.
Right. Nice. So then you had a foothold in Asbury, really, at that point.
That's where I started. Was at this, and my first office was in the boiler room of our apartment house at 500 Deal Lake Drive.
Wow.
I took a little area, and when I cleaned out, there was a big steam pipe running overhead. You had to duck your head down to get under the steam pipe to look at the plan table. But that's where I started.
That's cool.
Wow.
So then I guess in the scheme of things, I think your involvement in Kramer Guitars came before the Berkeley Carteret project, right?
Yes, it did.
Okay. So how did you get involved with Kramer Guitars?
Okay. I had moved out as my company grew from the boiler room office in Asbury to another office in the same building. I took over the maintenance shop and cleaned it out. I had an office in there and an estimator working for me by the name of Bruno Califatti because Mr. Hemstreet had passed away, and we started growing. I eventually built an office in Neptune at 3320 Highway 66 Neptune. It was a 3-level office, had a big warehouse in the back, and the company grew. I mean, we grew incredibly, thank God. I mean, I had this incredible man, Bruno Califatti, that worked for me, and as far as nobody could hold a candle to him when it came to estimating jobs. So we started growing, and we're building all over the state. And when I basically wound down, I added everything up, and I did $1 billion.
Wow.
$1 billion. We built over 32 schools, 7 high-rises, 6 hospitals, a big prison in Trenton, and you name it, we did it. So I started building a little industrial park in Neptune. And my goal was every year to try and build a building and own it.
Right.
Because when you're doing these big construction jobs, I mean, you're at the mercy of the weather, the union, the owner. I mean, you go through hell.
Sure.
I mean, I had one time over 500 employees on my payroll.
Wow.
And all union people. So, it was pretty hefty payroll. So, I wanted to have something for the future, and I started building this industrial park. And I had 3 or 4 buildings up. And one day a young man came to me with a realtor. They wanted to rent 5,000 square feet to make guitars. I don't know anything about guitars. I don't even play guitar. I know how to turn the stereo on and off.
Right. So
I show him the building. He says, yes, we want this. He says, I said, what are you going to build? He says, I have a prototype of this guitar. Why don't you take a look at it? He says, we're looking for investors. Okay. So I said, can I borrow the guitar? At that time, one of my construction superintendents, his name was Bill Ryan. And Bill had a son, Billy Ryan, who started out playing with Bruce Springsteen.
Right.
So I took this guitar that had an aluminum neck on it, and I gave it to Bill. I said, let Billy check it out.
Right.
So the next day or a day later, Billy, the young one, comes in. He says, wow, he says, this is something. He says, it got this great sound. He says, but it's kind of heavy. But I think if you could clean it up and tweak it, he says, I think you'd have something. And I said, well, Phil Patillo is the one that's putting this together. I know Phil. He says, Phil is the best. He says, you really got something.
Right.
Okay. Now I'm intrigued. I want to get involved in this. So I signed a lease and leased the building to them, and they're still looking for an investor. And they plan to go to a trade show in Chicago at McCormick Place.
Right.
So, and they thought they could sell about $100,000 worth of guitars at the show. About a week before the show, we get a major endorsee by the name of Stanley Clark, the bass player. So at the show, I met this young man, Dennis Berardi, and he had set this company up, and there were 2 other partners at the time. It was Gary Kramer, and it's called a senior moment. Pete LaPlaca.
Right.
Okay. And they're the ones that came up with the company. The original company was called BKL, Berardi, Kramer, and LaPlaca.
Gotcha.
And so they went to the trade show, and I said, look, if you make your sales quota, I says, I'll invest and put the money in the company that you need. So the show went from Wednesday to Sunday, and it was called the NAM show, National Association of Music Merchants. So on Thursday, I got a call from Dennis. Henry, you got to get out here. We're the hit of the show. Okay, my secretary gets me a flight, and I fly coach out to Chicago.
Right.
And I look at this show, and I am mesmerized. The place was probably, I'm probably exaggerating, 100,000 square feet, and we did $500,000 in sales. We had this big guitar neck with the V sticking up the headstock, since it was all made out of aluminum, about a 15-foot neck, so everybody saw it.
Right.
And we had this big photo of Stanley Clark and this endorsement, and sold $500,000 in guitars.
Wow, that's a lot.
And everybody wants to get this guitar, and some dealers are giving us cash in advance to be the first one to get them.
Right.
Wow, I'm impressed. Now I get a first-class ticket and fly home. I said, man, I'm in manufacturing. I hit it big. Well, little did I know. So we get home, and we started setting up the factory. They ended up renting 7,000 square feet of a 12,000-foot building. I put a big dividing wall in the front, set up everything, and now they're getting set to make product. Well, the first thing Kramer needed was I believe it's like a $30,000 or $40,000 check to give to Kaiser Aluminum Company, who was making the mold for the neck. The neck was an extrusion, which means you have to make a mold and you force hot aluminum into the extrusion under pressure, and then you take the mold off and you have the product.
Gotcha.
Well, Kaiser is located in Erie, Pennsylvania. I sent a check out. Man, they rushed everything through, and now they're going to ship it common carrier that said we'll have it in 3 days. I said, hell with the 3 days. We got to go out there now. So rented a van and sent somebody out and pick them up, bring them back. Now Dennis says, don't worry, we got a machine shop at Wall Airport who's going to put all these necks together for us. I said, great. He says, all we're going to do is assemble. We're going to get the finished neck from them. He says, I got a company called Monteith that's going to make our wood bodies, and they're going to send us a body completely finished, even with the sealer on it, so we don't have to do any spray painting or nothing. All we got to do is put the components together, ship it out the door.
Right.
Mistake number one. So now, this neck was very intense to make, because since it was a raw forging, which meant it needed a lot of machining. You had to put it on a milling machine and clean all the flask off the side of it, and then you had to glue wood inserts to the back of the neck.
Right.
Then you had to turn it over, and you had to glue a fingerboard to it. Then you had to turn it on a lathe, so that gave you the final shape of the neck.
Right.
The only problem was you use a cutter, and a cutter's got to cut through dissimilar material. It's cutting through aluminum, which is one density. It's cutting through the phenolic fingerboard, which is another, and it's cutting through wood.
Right.
So you develop what was called chatter. As it's spinning high speed, you get a little bit of chatter, which meant when it came off the lathe, you had to spend an hour or two just sanding it down to get it smooth.
Wow.
Okay. So off to the Dennis ships the necks off to the machine shop, and a week later, Dennis says, let's go over and check on the work. So he takes me to the machine shop. And Dennis says, when are we going to get these necks on? Oh, he says, I can't start for a couple of weeks. He says, they're over there in a corner. And he said, besides that price that I quoted you, he says, I did some more research. He says, I can't even meet that price because there's going to be too many rejects. And Dennis says, what are we going to do? I said, hey, Dennis, if we're going to be in business, we have to be in business.
Right.
So I went to the bank and borrowed some money. I said, let's buy our own machine shop. So Dennis found a broker, and he picked him up in a private airplane and took him to Bridgeport, and took him to Philly, a lot of these different places, and we bought, theoretically, all the machines that a machine shop would need to make our guitar necks.
Wow.
Problem number one.
Right.
We got the wrong size machines. Got the right machine. I mean, we got a lathe, we got a milling machine, we got drill presses, but we got the wrong size lathe because, like I mentioned, you got all this chatter. And the chatter came because the lathe was light, so it would keep jumping off the floor.
Right.
So it would hold a bed of 36 inches, which was the length of the neck. But we needed a what you call it? a lathe of about 8 feet long, so that it had the weight of it, so when you turned it, you didn't get the chatter.
Right.
So eventually we got the right machines, and we hired them. That's the next problem. I don't know, you need a machinist to make the tools to make the machine work. I mean, I'm a contractor.
Right.
So we got a machinist, and we started out doing maybe 8 or 10 necks in 12 or 14 hours to we're doing 8 or 10 necks an hour.
Right.
So that's basically how we got started in the aluminum neck part of the Kramer factory.
Right.
So Gary Kramer moved from Marina Del Rey, California, all the way out here. He's going to be in charge of production. And where does he move to? Secaucus, which meant he's got to come to down the Parkway every day
Right.
to the factory. And thank God there was a couple of snowstorms, and he wasn't used to snow. And make a long story short, I bought out Gary Kramer.
Right.
So now I became the largest shareholder in the Kramer. The name was changed from BKL to Kramer Guitar, then to Kramer Music Products, Inc.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you remember Kramer guitars. As a kid, I was a huge Eddie Van Halen fan, and Eddie Van Halen was a sponsor of Kramer
Spokesperson,
guitars, right?
Yeah.
And so all I wanted was a Kramer guitar. It was like you had to have a Kramer guitar.
Yeah.
You know, it looked like nothing, and just seeing Eddie holding it, you were like obsessed with it. I never had a Kramer guitar, unfortunately. But,
Okay, so and what happens next is, things are going good, but we continue to lose money because the cost was prohibitive to make these aluminum necks, and to stay competitive, you have to keep the price down. So anyway, now we're borrowing money from the bank, and we're now factoring the receivable because I couldn't keep funding that company and running my major construction company. I mean, I didn't have unlimited credit. I wanted these guys to stand on their own.
Right.
And we did some crazy things, okay? Now, back then, with Jimmy Carter as the president, the interest rates skyrocketed. I mean, the prime was somewhere up around 10, 11%. Banks were loaning you money at 16 and 18%. I mean, it was crazy.
Right.
So in order to borrow money, you had to go to a factor. You had to go to a bank that had a side company that would factor the money and fund your receivables. So every Friday, we would take a invoice to the bank, and they would loan you 80% of what the invoice says.
Wow.
So, except we're paying 4 over prime, so we're paying upwards of 20% to borrow money.
Right.
Wow.
Okay. Now the next problem is we're not getting the sales that we need to sustain the company, and unbeknownst to me, my partner Peter LaPlaca, who was a sales manager, is shipping guitars to people that didn't order it, so that on Friday we can go to the bank with an invoice and get a check. So that came back to haunt us.
Right.
All right. So little by little, the company looks like it's going to fail.
Right.
And Dennis Berardi is on a plane. Now, Dennis was the president of the company, and Dennis could sell ice cream to the Eskimos in the winter along with ice.
Right.
Okay? So he's on a plane. He bumps into some kid that's got a tour jacket. Says Eddie Van Halen World Tour.
Right.
Comes out. Turns out he's Eddie Van Halen's guitar tech. And Dennis talked him into taking him to Eddie's house that day to show him the new guitar that we had with a tremolo on it.
Right.
And the tremolo turned out to be the Floyd Rose tremolo.
Right.
Eddie loved the tremolo. He didn't like the aluminum neck. Next thing I know, we're using wood necks, and we got Eddie Van Halen as our biggest endorsee.
Right.
And sales went from $2.5 million a year and losing money to upwards of $18 million a year and making a profit.
Right.
Wow.
So that's what happened thanks to Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, and the Floyd Rose tremolo, basically, you have the whammy bar, whatever you want to call it.
And it was the only one that didn't go out of tune when you release it. You had these other whammy bars that when you release it, you'd have to retune the guitar because it would go out of tune. The Floyd Rose had the spring setup, and it compensated, and you didn't lose your tune.
Right.
Wow.
So you could whammy and stay in tune.
So from that, I mean, we would be the hit of the NAMM show.
Right.
Kramer had what was called the NAMM Jam, and every major heavy metal guy played our stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys from Gary Tallon and Springsteen to Bon Jovi, Twisted Sister, Queensryche, they all played our stuff.
Right.
Kiss, and we did an ad with John McEnroe and Vitas Gerulaitis playing a guitar and Eddie Van Halen playing a tennis racket.
I think I remember that. That's
Right.
cool. Yeah.
We were some stuff.
So when you're at that time, do you have the music bug now? Or are you like
No, I'm not.
You're
No,
still like
I mean,
running your construction company and just.
My
Business,
main
yeah.
business was construction.
Right.
That was my income. And,
So I guess it's good you stayed focused on that. Then.
and the guitars were a sideline. I mean, I'm now chairman of the board of the company. I didn't take an active role in running the company.
Right.
I mean, I had, Dennis, he was a genius when it came to marketing. I mean, he wasn't too good on tight controls with the money.
Right.
But he was a genius when it came to marketing.
Right.
Okay. I'm a Johnny Cash fan. And I have been since 1955 when I heard that first song. Later was Walk the Line. I heard Hey Porter, and I mean, I just couldn't believe the sound.
Right.
So whenever there was a Johnny Cash concert that I heard about, I went to. My first concert was at Symphony Hall in Newark.
Right.
I don't even remember the date. And then I saw him in Madison Square Garden. Johnny Cash was the first artist to sell out Madison Square Garden, a new garden.
Wow.
And back then, that's before you had all these, Ticketron and all this stuff. I mean,
Right.
you heard it on a radio station, you went and bought the ticket. He sold out Madison Square Garden,
Wow.
18,000 people.
Right.
Okay. At the same time, that was in 1969. At the same time, later on, I'm building a major hospital in Secaucus, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it was called Meadowlands Hospital. Now I believe it's called Riverside Hospital. And I'm sitting in a doctor, and at this time, Johnny, this is in, I want to say, around 1976. And the hospital is being managed by a company out of Nashville called Hospital Affiliates.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in a doctor's office, Dr. Cavelli, who was the president of the hospital. Now, this hospital was a private hospital financed by 5 doctors and lenders.
Wow.
And it had 200 all-private rooms. So, but the problem was Cavelli was having trouble with a lender. They wanted a professional management company to manage it, and he was looking at Hospital Affiliates. So I'm in Dr. Cavelli's office, and I'm going through this brochure of Hospital Affiliates, and I see a Dr. Nat Winston. I had just read Johnny Cash's autobiography, Man in Black, and he attributes that Dr. Winston helped him get off his pill habit. So now that's a connection.
Right.
So now I had Dr. Cavelli called Dr. Nat Winston in Nashville to arrange for me to meet Johnny Cash after a concert at the Garden State Arts Center
Right.
the next summer.
That's PNC now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I go backstage and I introduce myself as being in the guitar business. I wanted to have something in common. For the next couple of years, Johnny and June didn't even know I was a contractor. They thought June called me Henry the Guitar Maker.
Right.
So I introduced myself and I told him that we had this great new guitar. And he said, wow, that's interesting. He says, we're staying locally at the Hilton Inn, which is on exit 105 at Eatontown. Now I think it might be a Holiday Inn or change a half a dozen times. But that was where they were staying. He says, come by tomorrow morning about 9 o'clock, and I'll introduce you to Bob Wooten and Marshall Grant. So this is weird. I mean, talk about God being up there. I show up, and I get introduced to Marshall Grant first. And the House of Cash, which was the name of Johnny's office, another guitar company had made an inquiry, and they were going to meet Marshall Grant at the same place. So Marshall thought I'm the other guy, and they let me right in.
Gotcha.
Needless to show, the other guy doesn't show up, and I'm in there with Bob Wooten, who's my idol, and Marshall Grant, Johnny's bass player.
Right.
I showed him this new guitar, and he said, wow, that's something. I said, you want to go to the factory? He said, sure. Well, the Kramer factory was only like 5 miles away from, it was in Neptune on Green Grove Road, only 5 miles away from Tinton Falls. So in the car we go, and next thing I know, that night on stage, the entire Johnny Cash band is playing Kramer guitars. Marshall playing a Kramer bass, Bob is playing a Kramer guitar, and Jerry Hensler, the other guitar player, is playing another Kramer guitar.
Right.
And that's the start of an incredible ride that I'll never forget the rest of my life.
Right. So how did the relationship then evolve with the band?
Okay, so now I became friendly with Bob Wooten,
Right.
and we started to really hit it off. And wherever they were playing in the Northeast, they would send me, and I would get a copy of their schedule, and I would always show up. They'd take me backstage. I had front row seats and the whole 9 yards. I mean, every place from Nassau Coliseum to you name it, I was there.
Right.
And we developed a great friendship. And I said, hey, Bob, I says, next month I'm going to Bimini to go fishing. Would you guys like to go? Oh, that sounds good. So I invited Bob Wooten and Earl Ball, the piano player, to go to fishing in Bimini in the Bahamas. I used to go there 3 or 4 times a year. And I had this incredible captain, Captain Jimmy Albury, who's a legend. They're all gone now. But, so I invited Bob and Earl to Bimini. So we flew down, and I met them at Miami Airport. We got in a taxi, and we went over to Chalk's seaplane base because we're going to take a seaplane to Bimini. Well, the food on Bimini back then, this is, mid-'70s and stuff, was not that great, and I didn't like fish or lobster or anything. I've now changed my mind, but I wasn't in that. I was into meat and potatoes. So I said, I took them to an Italian restaurant for a big lunch, and we scoffed up, and now we get on a seaplane and off to Bimini.
Right.
So we got there, and we I'll never forget this. We get off the seaplane. There's this little place where you check in and customs and all that kind of stuff, and we had to walk maybe about a mile to the Bimini Big Game Fishing Club, where we had accommodations. And his native comes with a wheelbarrow, puts our suitcases in the wheelbarrow, and he wheels it down to Kings Highway, and we follow him.
Right.
So we get checked in, and we had a great fishing trip. And Bob says, man, he says, Johnny would love this place. He says, you ought to ask him. Well, I'm kind of shy. I am in many ways. No, I can't do that. Well, meanwhile, that night at the Big Game Club, there was a native named Ratty who was playing a guitar, and over in a corner was his old piano.
Right.
So Bob borrows Ratty's guitar, and Earl goes to sit by the piano.
Right.
And he says, damn, this thing's out of tune. He goes around, looks on the back, and it gave the date it was tuned was like 5 years ago.
Right.
So, but Earl couldn't make anything sound like a Steinway, so they put on a show that night.
Right.
It was incredible. So maybe 6 or 7 months later, I'm on Johnny's tour bus, and he says, you know, Henry, he said, Bob was telling me about this place in Bimini. He said, you know, I'd like to go there. I said, oh, my God, really? So next thing I know,
Right.
hooked up a trip, and we went to Bimini. We had 4 trips to Bimini.
Wow.
Incredible. I mean, you can just picture this. I mean, a fan is with his idol, and
Right.
they become the best of friends in the world.
Yeah.
And
So is that when you'd say your friendship developed was from the first trip to Bimini?
yes,
Yeah.
really. And then it really developed when, after that, Johnny invited me to spend a week with him in Georgia. He was making a movie called Murder in Cayuga County. And Johnny's playing as sheriff, Lamar Potts, and Andy Griffith is playing as land baron.
Right.
So I went down and spent a week with them, and I got picked up at the airport by the production company in a private car, production company on the side, and we went to the swamps in Griffin, Georgia.
Wow.
And while Johnny was out shooting the first day, I'm on the tour bus, and they used their tour bus as their dressing room because they could drive it down within distance of where the shooting took place. And
Right.
so I'm on the bus, and I brought some photos of the Berkeley Carteret Hotel and some aerial photos of the Paramount Theater and Convention Hall on the boardwalk. And I'm sitting in the tour bus, and it's just myself and June Carter. And June says, well, Henry, that's what she would call me,
Right.
with this little twang. She says, tell me something about where you come from, about your family. So I'm telling them about Asbury Park. And she says, I remember my mama telling me something about Asbury Park. I don't know if the Carter family played there or not, but my mama told me something about Asbury Park. And I showed her these pictures. Oh, my God, that's beautiful, that place. Okay. Now I'm sitting on the bus. Next thing, Johnny comes in, all sweaty. The first thing he does is go to the refrigerator, grabs a Coke, and we sit down. We're sitting facing each other on a little banquette, which at night closed down and turned into his private bed. I mean, this is his private area, all in black and leather and beautiful, okay? And June says, why, John, look what Henry's wanting to buy. Shows him the photos, and he looks at that, and he says, man, that's some incredible theater, Henry. You going to buy that? And he says, I'm working on it. I showed him pictures of the hotel. I think I had just signed a contract to buy it. And he said, man, he says, tell me more about it. And I started telling him, and I said, I'm putting a deal together with investors on a hotel. And the next thing he says, I want to open that place up. When you get it, he says, I'm going to open it. And he says, it's not going to cost you a penny.
Right.
Just like that. And I said, oh, my God. I said, Johnny, that's incredible. I says, I can't accept that. What do you mean? I says, I'm not your friend to take from you. I says, if you want to open that and let me pay you what you would normally get paid, and then if you want to make an investment in a hotel, he said, maybe we could talk.
Right.
He said, that sounds good. Didn't say a word. We had a little small talk. 2 days later, we're again on a set, and he introduces me to his accountant. His name was Gary Baker, who Johnny had come in from Nashville to Griffin, Georgia, specifically to talk about my proposal. So Johnny says, Henry wants to do this. He says, I want you to take a look at it, see if it works. He says, are you available to go to Asbury Park? He says, Johnny, anything you want. So when I got home a week later, Gary Baker flies to Newark. I pick him up. He comes to Asbury Park.
Right.
I showed him a prospectus on a hotel, and Johnny and June wrote out a check. They were my first investors in a Berkeley Carteret hotel.
Right.
Wow.
So that was, I think, 1983.
Yeah, that was probably 84 in that area.
Okay. And I believe the purchase price of the hotel was $325,000.
I bought the hotel. They were going to tear the hotel down.
That's crazy.
And I saved it from the wrecking ball.
Right.
Okay, when I bought it, the inhabitants were 2 wild dogs and a flock of pigeons.
Right.
So what was the status of Asbury Park in '84?
It was rough shape. I mean, you had all the older hotels. Since there was no business, they were allowed to rent rooms to mental outreach patients from Marlborough. One time, Asbury Park had 1,600 displaced mental patients living in Asbury Park. And
So the mental hospital was overloaded, so they
yes,
relocated.
and that's when they was talking about shutting down these mental hospitals, and they need a place for these people, and they were using these old hotels in Asbury and allowing them to occupy this place. So you had mental patients walking up and down the streets of the town, and no disparaging on these poor people. I mean, they need a place to live too.
Sure.
But when they're concentrated in one area, it really
Yeah. Plays a lot.
And
So-
there's nothing else in the town.
right, and everything is going to hell in the town.
Right.
I'm going to tell you a funny story. Okay? A lot of people didn't even believe that I knew Johnny Cash. So, like I mentioned, Johnny became my first investor in a hotel. Then Ernie Onassis was one of my investors in a hotel. He was an incredible friend, still is. And the Hovnanian brothers, three of them were investors in the hotel. So we really had something going on.
Right.
So there was an old antique store on Main Street that later found out was a fence for stolen merchandise and anything. I mean, the
Right.
guy's name was Tony Houston, and I'm not saying he's crooked, but, a little on the gray area.
Right.
And he had a sign in the window that just said, "We buy for cash and we sell for cash." Next thing I know, he's got plastered over the entire window, "We buy for cash, we sell for cash, but we need Johnny Cash and we need him now. Somebody's got to save this town." And
Right.
okay. So Johnny and June come down from New York one night to check out the progress into Berkeley, and we're driving down Main Street, heading over to Christie's Restaurant in Wanamassa, and I showed Johnny the sign on the window. And June yells, "Stop, we got to stop this car." Pull the limo over, and we get out. Thank God I had a camera with me. I get a picture in front of the sign.
Right.
We need Johnny Cash.
I just saw it in here. Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen the picture. Yeah.
Okay.
awesome.
Right.
So now, Johnny knocks on the door, and you hear this voice, "Sorry, we're closed." It's about 6 or 6:30 in the evening. "Sorry, we're closed." Johnny knocks again. "Hey, buddy, I don't think you heard me. We're closed."
Right.
Johnny knocks again. "I don't think you heard me. This place is effing closed."
Right.
Johnny leans down and says, "Excuse me, sir. I see by the sign in the window you're looking for me." He
Right.
says, "Here I am." And this guy let out a scream you could have heard in Nashville. They open the door, and oh my God. The guy yells up to his wife, and she comes running down like something out of I Love Lucy. She's got her right slipper on her left foot. I mean, it was incredible. And that's part of the introduction of
Right.
Johnny Cash in Asbury Park.
And then another part of it is you brought him to, was it like a city hall meeting basically?
Okay. Again, this is just incredible how this whole thing panned out. Excuse me, let me have a little drink
Sure.
here.
Yes, I know at the time. We'll give Nick West a quick shout out. Nick's a previous guest of the MulletCast as well, and Nick led our introduction to Henry Vaccaro. So thank you, Nick, for
Thank you, Nick.
for coming in and making the introduction.
See you later, Cousin Nick. So I was, like I mentioned to you, any time that Johnny Cash was touring, they would always send me their tour schedule ahead of time.
Right.
Well, they had a tour through Florida. Well, I wanted to go, so I just fly down to Florida, get on the bus, and go with them on tour.
Right.
Well, on this one tour, June was ill. She had some surgery done in Nashville, so Carlene, her daughter, took June's place on the show. Also on the bus was Steve Goodman, that wrote City of New Orleans. An incredible man. He died about a year later. He had leukemia. And Johnny wanted to help him, and he took him on tour with him. So, I mean, I got to meet all these incredible people. So I'm on the tour, and Johnny says, "Well, Henry, if I'm going to be involved with you in Asbury Park, don't you think I should be seen there?"
Right.
Oh, my God, I can't believe this. I said, "Yeah, that would be great." He said, "Okay, my sister Reba will call you, and we'll work it out." So I fly home. I don't think anything of it. Maybe a month later, Reba, who was Johnny's sister that ran his office, the House of Cash, calls me. She says, "John's coming in tomorrow at like 11 o'clock at Newark Airport. Can you pick him up?" I said, "Absolutely."
Right.
Now, it so happened to be the same night that there was a city council meeting, so I called up Mayor Ray Kramer. He said, "Oh, my God, you're bringing Johnny Cash here?" He said, "Yeah, okay." So now I'm on my way to Newark Airport to pick him up, and I had a two-way radio in my car. Next thing I hear on the radio, base to car one, is, "Henry, I just got a call from Reba, Johnny's sister. He missed the plane. He's now coming in at around 1 o'clock at LaGuardia.
Right.
Wow. So I quickly made a U-turn, turned back to the office, and I had one of my guys that worked for me. I said, please draw me up to LaGuardia.
Right.
So I met Johnny as he's coming off the plane, and he picked up his bag, and we got in a limo, and he says, well, Henry, I got a couple of stops while I'm here in the city. He says, I got to stop over at my dentist, and then I got to stop over at CBS Records. I said, okay, so I'm in a car, and we pull up to the dentist in this high-rise, and Johnny goes in. I'm in a car talking to the driver, and about an hour later, he comes out, and now we're off to Black Rock.
Right.
And as soon as we pull up, Johnny gets out. He says, Henry, come on in with me. I said, man, where am I going? I'm going into the president of Columbia Records, Dick Asher's office.
Right.
So we go in. Everybody sees Johnny Cash. Asher's right up, and I'm sitting in this little anteroom outside while Johnny's talking about a new record contract. He says, Henry, come on in here. Now I'm in this big conference table, and there's Dick Asher, Johnny Cash, and myself. And Dick says, what are you doing in the area, John? He says, well, I'm going with Henry here. He says, I'm an investor with him in this hotel. What hotel? He says, the Berkeley Carteret. Oh, he says, I remember staying there with my mother and father back in the 30s. Wow. He says, if you need another investor, let me know. I mean, that's the power of Johnny Cash.
Right.
Okay. Now, we get in a car. Now, the council meeting starts about 6 o'clock. Now, it's 5:30 in New York traffic.
Right.
And you're not even getting out of the tunnel by 6 o'clock.
Absolutely.
So we're running late, and this is before cell phones, and we go through the tunnel, and I says, Kurt was the name of his driver. I said, Kurt, you got to pull over. Let me make a phone call. Sure. So we pulled over in the service area, and I got on a payphone, and only person I could call was the police department. Now it's about 7 o'clock. I talked to the captain on duty. I said, please go next door and tell the mayor we're coming, but we're going to be at least an hour and a half late.
Right.
He said, I'll make sure he gets the message. So now we arrive. It's about 8:30. The council meeting was over about 8 o'clock, and everybody is still there waiting. And out steps Johnny Cash in his big cowboy duster with a cape. And I swear to God, he looked like the Pope. It was purple underneath, black cape, purple underneath, and 6'3" man steps out and walks in. I'm ready for him to kneel down and kiss his ring.
Right.
So he holds court in a city council meeting, and it was one of the times when, if it could be perfect, it was. I remembered everybody's name there. I said, introduce him to Johnny Cash, and he talks to the council. And they were so impressed. He says, I really like to see the theater. Now it's about 9 o'clock at night. Oh, we'll get somebody, and they arranged for somebody to go down and open up the theater and the convention hall for us. And there's pictures of Johnny in Asbury Park.
Right.
That was his real first taste of everything.
That's amazing. So it's like the one thing that struck me though is Johnny told you a couple times just things in passing, like, I'm interested in this deal. I'll take a look at it. Then he sends his accountant. He tells you, I'll come down to Asbury sometime, and then you get the phone call. And he's showing. So he was, definitely a man that whatever he said, he meant, I guess.
Okay. Now, at the time, he had an apartment in New York that they sublet from Eliza Minnelli. But in New York, like a one-bedroom apartment is like a small room and a closet. I mean, it wasn't that big.
Right.
So, and they agreed to give up the apartment and take up a residence in the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. And they had an incredible suite overlooking the ocean.
That's awesome.
2 stars on the door.
That's cool. There's actually a singer in Asbury named Jack. It's a woman, Jahk, and she recently did a photo shoot in the Johnny Cash suite up there.
Well, I'm sure it's not like it was then.
Probably not. Right.
Because they furnish it with their own antiques. They brought a whole truckload of antiques from Nashville. Now, you always hear about the Lincoln bed that's in the White House.
Right.
There were 3 Lincoln beds. Johnny Cash owned the other 2.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. So, I mean, you said 1984, like Asbury is a disaster. Aside from, $325,000 to buy a hotel doesn't sound like a lot, but you were investing millions of dollars.
$18 million.
Right, to rebuild this hotel.
Well, what we did was a complete gut.
Right.
Originally, there were 400 rooms, and we gutted everything.
Right.
And we restored the ballrooms to their elegance of the 1926 era.
Wow.
And then we introduced 250 new rooms that met today's standards.
Right. So did people think you were crazy?
Yeah, they still do.
Right.
I probably was.
Yeah. I mean, why were you so interested in redeveloping Berkeley?
Asbury Park was my hometown.
Right.
Okay. And I just loved the town. Okay. And our family goes back so far. Back in the late 30s, my grandfather, who immigrated from Italy to Asbury Park,
Right.
Was instrumental in changing the form of government. My Aunt Mary Martin, was a city clerk for over 40 years.
Wow.
My Uncle Henry was the first independent ever elected to the city council, and my daughter Tony was the youngest council person in the nation to be elected to a city council post. So I had a love for Asbury Park.
Right.
But more than that, when the Berkeley was built in the late 20s, my grandfather had the contract to do all the landscaping. He was a landscape contractor.
Right.
And they couldn't pay him. So my grandfather took stock in the hotel in lieu of debt.
Right.
I have those stock certificates.
Do you really?
I do. It says
That's
to
cool.
Henry A. Vaccaro in lieu of debt, like $1,100 and some dollars. You can imagine what that was in the 20s.
Right.
And then my grandfather, my grandfather had a contract to cut the grass there. And as my father growing up, he worked at the Berkeley cutting the grass before he went to medical school.
Wow.
And then my mother and father were married there.
Right.
And then my father's testimonial dinner was there.
Right. Yeah. So you have a lot of history with the building.
I do.
Right.
And I knew that was the cornerstone of the redevelopment. If that failed, everything else is going to fail around it.
Right. So how did it so you oversaw the redevelopment yourself? That was your construction project also?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then how was it received when it opened?
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, everybody came. We want to know what we did was HUD had a program called a UDAG, UDAG, which stands for Urban Development Action Grant. Mm-hmm. And they would grant money to urban towns that needed the money as long as you provided X amount of jobs. There was a ratio that you had to meet in order to apply for a grant.
Right.
Well, it was very difficult getting construction funding in Asbury Park in 1984, 85. I mean, the banks talk about, blackballing a town. They wouldn't touch it.
Right.
They wouldn't touch it. And I put together a deal that required an investment. I put together what's called a limited partnership, where investors would invest like $100,000 units into the hotel, and they would get tax credits back and all that kind of stuff. And then we got a conventional mortgage from First National Bank at Toms River, thanks to Harry Hovnanian. He was a big stockholder there. No local banks would touch me.
Right.
And then we got what was called a UDAG grant. We got a $3.2 million grant. In other words, it was predicated on a number of jobs you would create, and we far exceeded that. And couple that grant with the cash investment and the mortgage, that was the money needed to get the hotel up and running. After the hotel was up and running, we won an award in Washington, D.C. from HUD. And believe it or not, a young
It's Mitch McConnell, right?
Mitch McConnell presented us with the award. So we won the award as the most outstanding project in the United States of America for using public and private money.
That's amazing.
And things were running pretty good.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen a picture
incredible.
of Mitch McConnell presenting you with the award.
Yeah.
Yeah, in D.C. It's cool. That's pretty amazing.
Wow.
We could talk to you for days and days and days and days, and probably, hopefully, you'll come back and talk to us again.
As long as I don't bore you.
Right, exactly.
Now I'm loving this.
Because we're gonna, we don't have a lot of time left. So what we'll try to do is quickly get to maybe a good stopping point, and then hopefully in the future you'll come talk to us again. But so did Johnny Cash appear when the Berkeley opened, and
Yes.
did the Paramount reopen?
Absolutely. We had a grand opening, and we had fireworks and the whole 9 yards, and he did a show at the Paramount, timed with the real grand opening of the hotel, and was in October 1985.
Wow. And what was that like for you as someone that grew up? Now your idol's there. He helped you rebuild the hotel that meant so much to your family.
You can't believe it.
Yeah.
You can't believe the emotional high that night.
Right.
I mean, I'm on stage and I introduced Johnny Cash, and all the guys in the band, I knew all their names, and I mean, it was just, and then Ernie Onassis comes on and introduces him. The mayor gives him the key to the city, and wow.
It's really insane.
Yeah.
I mean, did you ever imagine in your life
Never.
that that's
In my
possible?
wildest dream to see that tractor trailer outside the Johnny Cash show unloading sound equipment at the stage door of the Paramount Theater, and then his bus, JC Unit 1, pull up to the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. Man, I was in heaven.
Yeah.
I like that JC Unit 1. That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that is insane. I mean, that's insane.
See, and I tell people I got to be friends with Johnny Cash through his stomach. They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "They loved Italian food that you couldn't get in Tennessee."
Right.
So I would go over to Peon Cones in Bradley Beach, and whenever I would get on his tour bus with him, I'd pack a cooler full of prosciutto, gabagool, mozzarella, olive,
Right.
you name it, and they loved it. Right
Yeah.
after the show, he'd sit down and we'd all eat.
All right, that's cool. So, how much time did Johnny spend at the Berkeley in the suite?
As whenever they were on the East Coast, if they're doing a tour on the East Coast, they would use the Berkeley. They were at least there, minimally 7-8 times a year.
Oh wow, it's a lot.
And in fact, like what they did is every spring, he around income tax time, April 15th, where
Right.
all his fans are feeling the pinch for paying income tax, he would always tour Europe.
Oh, really?
Or Ireland or Germany.
Right.
And then when he'd come back, he'd spend a weekend in Berkeley just to
wow.
unwind. And they loved it there because when they're in Nashville, I mean, everybody's on top of them. Here,
Right.
they got to,
Could kind of walk around.
and I mean, they'd walk the boardwalk, they'd eat in restaurants. I mean, they're pretty cool, man.
So following this, the reinvestment in the Berkeley, did the boardwalk follow?
Well, what happened was, after the investment in the Berkeley, the next thing was that the city, well, maybe prior to this, the city was going to sell the entire beachfront. And they had a deal to sell it for $2 million. I didn't like that. I went to court and I got a restraining order and I stopped the city from selling the beachfront.
Right.
And basically, they were giving it away. They're going to sell all the buildings on the beachfront and the boardwalk and the real estate for $2 million from the casino building all the way down to the Marine Grill site,
Right.
including the convention hall, the Paramount Theater, and all. I said, no, that's not right. And I stopped them. And I forced them to set up a redevelopment authority. And the Mayor Kramer, he actually took my advice, and I hooked him up with a lawyer from Wilentz, Goldman and Spitzer, probably one of the most prestigious law firms in the state, who just was involved in a successful, at this time, the New Brunswick redevelopment was chaired by Wilentz, Goldman and Spitzer.
Right.
And what they did was, and the mayor agreed. He says, you got to get the politics out of this because it had a taint.
Right.
They set up a redevelopment advisory board of prestigious businessmen in the area. It included Jim Rifficy, who was a vice president of Amerada Hess. It included James Dolan, the president of the gas company, Jules Plangiers, the publisher of the Asbury Park Press, Peter Beal, who was a banker, Frank Anfuso, another banker, and then Jim Hunt, a local funeral director. So you had prestigious businessmen that took the redevelopment away from the politics of the city of Asbury. And they set up this agency, and they went out and hired a planner and put it out to bid.
Right. So then that redevelopment plan is really the seeds of what we see today, right?
That was the forerunner
Right.
of the plan. But again, at the time, it had oversight, okay, which is not there today.
Right.
And that's another story,
Yep.
and that'll blow your mind what
Right.
some of these former council people did.
Right. I can imagine. So you get to a point now that you have the lawsuit, and then this committee's put in place. What was your role, kind of
Okay.
going forward from there?
I wanted to be the developer.
Right.
And my brother and I went out and purchased over 20 pieces of property in the redevelopment zone. We purchased 3 motels, a couple of parking lots, a bar, the Palace Amusements, and we could carry those, but we didn't have the funds to do a major development. So the city put it out for bids, but we felt at least we're going to be a player, because whoever becomes a master developer at least has to talk to us, because we got a piece of property in that zone, and hey, we're going to get a shot to do the building.
Right.
That's all I wanted.
Right.
Okay. Well, I was having trouble getting partners, and Ernie Anastas hooked me up with a man by the name of Dick Levy, who was a vice president of Cushman and Wakefield.
Right.
And coincidentally, the first potential investor that we met was Donald Trump.
Right.
Wow.
I was taken up. I had a meeting in Trump Tower on the 60th floor, wherever his office was, and he was very gracious. But he said, "Look, I got my plate full in New York." He was doing a Commodore Hotel. He had finished that. He had finished Trump Tower, and he's got a lot of stuff going on. And
Right.
he said, "I can't do Asbury Park right now," and we left.
Right.
And then Cushman and Wakefield hooked me up with Carabetta. a company called Carabetta Enterprises from Meriden, Connecticut. They had just started a development in Revere, Massachusetts, which was very similar to Asbury Park. It was an old seashore resort town, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 miles from Boston.
Right.
And he seemed like the perfect partner. When I met Joe Carabetta, he came into my office very unassuming. He had on a navy pea coat. I'll never forget it. Had this handlebar mustache that he twirled, and he reminded me of my grandfather, this old Italian immigrant. He'd sit down at the table, and we're talking. And on my wall, I had this big blue marlin that I had caught.
Right.
He loved fishing. Then he sees a bust of Johnny Cash. He loved country music. And this is a self-made man that never even went to high school. And he's got this big company. Well, it seemed like a perfect fit, and we kind of made a marriage. And it didn't turn out to be as great as I thought.
Right. All right, so maybe we'll leave that as our cliffhanger. We'll find out about your partnership with Carabetta, and then what happened with the development of the Asbury waterfront, hopefully in the future. So maybe if we can leave off, let's talk a little bit about Johnny Cash to kind of close out.
Okay.
What's it like when you took that first fishing trip with him, and now you're kind of like alone on a boat with your idol?
Oh, my God.
What do you say to someone like that? What's that experience like?
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just two guys alone. When I say alone, we had this big boat, but we're up on, half the time we're up on a flying bridge. There's a big canvas top covering us, and the boat's swaying, and we're dragging baits in the water, and we're just talking.
Right.
I mean, you can't imagine. I mean, he wanted to know all about my family, about my father, and I told him.
Right.
And he had a cross around his neck. I never even wear jewelry. I don't even have a watch.
Right.
I didn't think nothing of it. About 6 months later, when I get home, I get a package in the mail from the House of Cash, which was his office. I open it up and I start to cry. In that package was this sterling silver cross that he had around his neck. He had it encased in solid gold.
Wow.
And on the back it said, "To my friend Henry, in memory of your father Sebastian, Johnny Cash, Easter 1983.
Really? Wow.
Very moving. That's the kind of man he was.
That's amazing.
But we talked about crazy stuff about, I says, how come you left Sun Records? I mean, you got your start there. Henry, he says, Sam Fells is a great guy. I said, but he forgot how to count. I said, what do you mean? He says, my first royalty check was like $121.
Right.
So anyway, that's the kind of stuff we talk
Right.
about. And then on one of the trips later on in the mid-'80s, we're up there talking, and he was going to be roasted in Memphis, Tennessee the following month. We would always make sure that we did a lot of fishing in June because that's when a tuna would run in Bimini.
Right.
So he says, you're going to be in my roast, aren't you? I said, yeah. Well, he didn't know I'm going to be a roaster. He thought I'm just going to attend it. So he says, I'm going to introduce you to my friend Arthur Smith. Did you ever hear him? I says, no, I don't know who Arthur is. He says, well, he wrote this song, Fourth Man in the Fire, and Guitar Boogie, and a lot of songs. I said, wow. He says, he wrote this song that was in his movie Deliverance. He says, Dueling Banjos. I said, wow, I didn't know that. I said, that's
wow.
incredible. So then he proceeds to tell me the story. He says, Arthur writes this song, and it was, I think, first called Feuding Guitars, not even Dueling Banjos, guitars.
Wow. Right.
Somebody says, Arthur, you got to go to this movie. Your song is in there. He says, Arthur goes to the movie. He says, damn. He says, somebody stole my song, and they changed the name, and nobody paid me any money.
Right.
So he goes to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, well, can you prove you wrote it? Here's all the papers. He says, Arthur, I'm going to give you the best legal advice in the world. What's that? Don't do nothing. He says, what do you mean? He says, let it become a hit. He says, you got them right where you want them. He says, you can sue them for copyright infringement. You get triple damages plus my legal fees. Okay? Now it becomes a #1 country song.
Wow.
Now Arthur doesn't need a lawyer. He makes an appointment. I think he went to New York. I don't know when. He meets with like the president of Paramount and
Right.
sits down and puts his fist on the table like that. He says, my name is Arthur Smith. He says, you boys done stole my song, and I wants my money, and I wants my money now.
Right.
What are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. And according to Johnny, I can't swear to this, but I can swear that Johnny Cash told me Arthur had a little pistol in his boot. He done put it on the desk. He says, I don't think you heard me.
Oh, man.
Well, I don't know if that's true,
Right.
but I do know 3 months later, Arthur got an out-of-court settlement from the motion picture
Nice.
company. The first time anybody won a claim against using a song without permission in a movie. That was Arthur Smith.
That's cool.
So he was going to be one of the roasters at this roast.
That's funny. So did you appear at the roast?
Oh, boy, did I.
Do you remember what you said?
I can never forget it. It was a black tie affair before a mostly Jewish audience at the Peabody Hotel in Memphis. Johnny received the Shalom Peace Award from the State of Israel. Well, I had a friend of mine who was a gag writer that wrote for Sid Caesar and Johnny Carson, and he wrote some stuff for me. Okay. Well, the first roaster was none other than Sam Phillips, and I think Sam was stoned because you couldn't even understand him. He was incoherent, and next thing I know, Waylon Jennings, who's the master of ceremony, gongs him.
Right.
They get the hook, and they pull Sam off. I'm the next guy.
Right.
And I'm a nervous wreck. It's a black tie affair, mostly Jewish audience, and believe me, I don't drink. I belted down 3 scotches.
Right.
So I got up and I made a phony telegram up, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to read this telegram from a former friend and close friend of Johnny Cash. And it went like this. Peabody Hotel, Memphis, Tennessee. Dear Johnny, congratulations on this momentous occasion. Your inspiration is, I'm trying to think, inspiration is hard to follow, something like that. I hope to see you soon at the bank in Switzerland. Your friend, President Ferdinand Marcos. And everybody starts laughing.
Right.
So now I says, now that everybody's in such a good mood, I'm going to tell you folks something. I said, Johnny Cash is only a stage name. He said, what? I said, his real name is Murray Lipschitz. He said, the only son of Ida and Izzy. And when they landed on Ellis Island, they sold the Statue of Liberty for cash and changed your name. This place went crazy. Christopherson grabs a mic. He says, son, you come a long way from a boy named Sue to Murray Lipschitz. And then I said, life wasn't easy for young John. His father took him out into the woods, but he didn't take him out far enough, and he found his way home. So it was funny. The last thing I said, I recall like it was yesterday, I said, anybody's ever been to Johnny Cash's house knows that he's an avid antique collector. He's got a beautiful collection of Louis XIV furniture. But if he doesn't pay Louis by the 14th, he's got to give it back. So with that, I sat down, and everything is great. But the next guy is Arthur Smith, and he tore the place apart.
Yeah.
So
that's fantastic.
You got time for an Arthur Smith?
Sure, let's hear the Arthur.
So Arthur gets up and he says, ladies and gentlemen, he says, I knew Johnny Cash and Waylon. He says, but it was in that nervous period in their life when they're popping pills, right? He said, Johnny, come to my house, and my wife Dorothy was sewing on a machine, and a thread come loose. And Johnny said, don't worry about it. And he said, I'll be darned, he threaded it. But it was still moving. And he said, Johnny and I were such good friends, he invited me down to the set of the movie where he was playing a part of this Catholic priest. So I drove down to the set of the movie, and after the shooting, he said, come on, Arthur, we'll go back to the hotel and get something to eat. He says, I think he had a company car. As we get into the car, and Johnny's driving, he still had on a clerical collar, and damn, he's driving all over the road. He says, next thing I know, policemen come up beside us and rang the siren and pulled us over. And he looked down at Johnny. He said, why, Father, is there something wrong here all over the road? And Johnny says, I don't think so. He says, well, I'm just going to give you a warning. He said, but just be careful. And Johnny said, I'm just tired. The policeman's ready to walk away. He said, wait a minute, Father. He said, what's in that bottle on the seat between you and the other gentleman? And Johnny said, oh, that's just holy water. He says, the policeman reached in and took the top off it. He said, wait a minute, Father. He said, that's wine. Johnny looked at him. Praise the Lord, he did it again. So, that was at this roast. Incredible. That's awesome. Incredible. So I got it.
That's cool.
That was one of the highlights of my life, being at that roast.
That's amazing. Yeah, it sounds like you delivered good material.
Thanks to my friend Mark Nelson, who wrote this stuff for me.
Just happened to have a gag writer as a friend, so that's killer. All right, Henry, I appreciate you coming in.
My pleasure.
We'll get together and schedule some time for the next installment. Once again, check out Henry online, Henry Vaccaro Sr. He's on Facebook. Find his book, Johnny Cash is a Friend of Mine, available on Amazon. And Henry, we really appreciate you coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Once again, my name's Evan Baumer. Find me on Instagram at Evan Baumer.
Mike Mercia, you can find me at @themortgageguy_Mike, and you can find the MulletCast in this segment on the MulletCast on Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you.